Monday, he urged voters to the polls, calling for turnout of 75, 80, 19 or 100%. Instead, according to the electoral data, it was just over 50%. The vote had been boycotted by some opposition parties. They objected to Talon's decision to run for a second 5-year mandate. That was seen as a U-turn on a pledge he made as a candidate in 2016 to serve only one term. Talon had held up Benin's strong economic growth as the main reason for him to seek re-election. Rivals have also criticized this 2-year-old cotton magnate for changes he's pushed through the election law. That resulted in total control of parliament by his supporters and the effective exclusion of leading rivals from the presidential race. Several prominent opposition leaders have been detained this year on terrorism-related charges, Amnesty International has said. Talon has denied his government is targeting opponents.
That report by Neka Chile of Reuters. Hundreds of women have reported that they were subjected to horrific sexual violence by Ethiopian and allied Eritrean soldiers after fighting broke out in November in the mountainous northern region of Ethiopia, according to doctors. Some women were held captive for extended periods, days or weeks at a time, according to Dr. Fasika Amdesalesye, the top public health official for the government-appointed interim administration in Tigray. Reports of rape have been circulating here for months, but Fasika's assertion, based on women's accounts, marks the first time an Ethiopian official, in this case a top regional health officer, has made a sexual slavery accusation in connection with the conflict in Tigray. Ethiopians are returning home after life as migrants in Yemen became intolerable. Jamal Hussein had dreamed of a better life in Saudi Arabia, but after being stranded like thousands of others in war-torn Yemen, he had to journey across the country to escape back to Ethiopia. Here's Reuters' Emma McCarthy with more.
Ethiopian migrant Jamal Hussein is waiting to board a flight out of Yemen. It's the final stage of his journey through a war-torn country and also the end to his dream of a better life in Saudi Arabia.
I used to work on the cat fields in Ethiopia, and then I wanted to go to Saudi to work, so I came to Yemen. That's when I found out there was a war in Yemen. I had not known.
Many more like Hussein are calling it quits. It's the reversal of a long-standing and often perilous flow of migrants by sea and then north through Yemen to Gulf states for work. But coronavirus restrictions and conflict have left many stranded in Yemen. The country has been mired in violence since 2015. Millions are on the brink of famine. Having reached Sana'a in the country's north, which is under the control of the Houthi movement, Hussein says he was detained with other migrants in a holding facility. Last month, he survived a fire at the centre that killed dozens. After the blaze, Hussein says the Houthis dropped him in the desert and he made his way to the port city of Aden. There, he found help from the UN's migration agency. The IOM says 11,000 people have returned to the Horn of Africa by boat this year. Dozens have died in recent weeks after people smuggling boats capsized. That's why the IOM is now putting on flights to return migrants safely. Hussein's flight was on Tuesday. He's one of an initial group of 1,100 Ethiopians approved for voluntary humanitarian return. But the IOM warns that more than 32,000 migrants remain stranded across Yemen in dire circumstances.
That was Emma McCarthy of Reuters with that report. South African mobile communications company Vodacom South Africa, with British parent company Vodafone and charity Hestia, have launched a free mobile phone application to support targets of gender-based violence, which soared during the coronavirus pandemic. The Vodacom application Bright Sky provides information for people to identify gender-based violence and get counseling and emergency help. Franco Puglisi reports from Johannesburg.
53 years old South African Janine, who does not want to use her family name, was in an abusive relationship for 2 years. It got worse when her boyfriend lost work because of the coronavirus pandemic and took his anger out on her.
He was mean and nasty and cruel and wanted to hurt me, physically, emotionally, verbally, mentally. They make you financially dependent on them. Then you think, where am I going to go? There's nowhere to go. What do I do?
South African police say reported annual sexual assault had been rising since 2016 and hit more than 53,000 last year. Campaigners blame the pandemic lockdowns and say the actual number of assaults, including those that go unreported, are much higher.
The criminal justice system is failing the women and the children in South Africa. If you look at the statistics, you will see there is a constant increase of rape and sexual offences in South Africa, but those statistics are not a correct picture of what is happening in reality.
To help survivors of assault, telecoms company Vodacom, with British parent company Vodafone and charity Estia, in November launched the mobile application Bright Sky.
The app has got a suite of 12 services, or you can call them functionalities. You will be able to determine if you are in an abusive relationship or not.
The app comes in 3 South African languages: English, Sesotho and isiZulu. Bright Sky allows users to get help without the stigma of having to ask for it.
The app also has emergency services. It's a directory of emergency services which include geolocation, because as soon as you put in where you are using the app from, it will be able to identify your location and it will pinpoint you to the nearest facility.
Vodacom says the app has been downloaded about 1,000 times in South Africa, helping many women like Janine.
What I like about this app is there are 2 areas. You can get advice for yourself or for someone else. It gives you a whole lot of scenarios. It explains what happens. It gives you a number where you can phone. There's a lot of information. I think this app really is amazing and would give somebody just resources where you can get advice.
The app to help gender-based violence survivors is not just for South Africa. Bright Sky is also available in Britain, Europe and New Zealand. Franco Puglisi for VOA News, Johannesburg.
The coronavirus pandemic will cause significant global unrest for several years, U.S. intelligence chiefs warned lawmakers Wednesday. In the first public worldwide threats briefing in more than 2 years, China's failure to stop the spread of COVID-19, along with increasing competition with the United States, was named the top threat. VOA's congressional correspondent Catherine Gibson has more from Capitol Hill.
The global economic and public health crises caused by the coronavirus pandemic will only increase worldwide unrest, U.S. intelligence officials warned lawmakers Wednesday.
We face a broad array of long-standing and emerging threats whose intersection is raising the potential for cascading crises. Our increasingly interconnected and mobile world offers enormous opportunities, but at the same time it multiplies our challenges.
The United States faces threats from Russia, North Korea, and Iran, according to an annual assessment released this week by 18 U.S. intelligence agencies.
The threat assessment goes into wide detail on a variety of challenges that we face. But I have some issues in particular I'd like to address. Cybersecurity, election security, the rise in domestic violent extremism, and obviously the rise of China, and particularly the Chinese Communist Party.
China's vaccine diplomacy, just the latest example of direct competition with the U.S. when it comes to global influence.
China increasingly is a near-peer competitor, challenging the United States in multiple areas while pushing to revise global norms in ways that favor the authoritarian Chinese system.
And in the wake of the massive SolarWinds cyber attack blamed on Russian hackers, U.S. lawmakers said cybersecurity must be taken more seriously.
SolarWinds hack illustrates how easily U.S. infrastructure can be compromised. It's not hard to imagine how much destruction could be levied if our adversaries were determined to conduct such an attack beyond espionage on things like the power grid or our water supply.
Election security also a major tension point with Russia following last year's U.S. presidential election.
Russia undertook a sophisticated disinformation campaign in 2020 to undercut our current president and to bolster the candidacy of the former one. We need to make clear that those who perpetrated this hostile interference will again pay a price.
This week's briefing for lawmakers marks the first time in 2 years that U.S. intelligence agencies have publicly outlined worldwide threats. The practice was suspended during the last year of the Trump administration. Catherine Gibson, VOA News, Washington.
There are varied opinions on the influx of migrants at the U.S.-Mexico border, where some see it as a humanitarian crisis and others as a political issue. I spoke to Joanna LeBlanc, a national security law and foreign policy expert.
Well, I think the U.S. and Mexico border crisis is very nuanced, and it requires a lot of analysis and of thinking, especially think about the Immigration Nationality Act, which is the INA, about the rights of people to apply for asylum here in America and the process of doing such. And what we saw under the Trump administration is that in the midst of COVID, the Trump administration made it very clear that folks would not be able to even apply for asylum. And how that was done is there was negotiations between the government of Mexico and the United States government.
You mentioned the actions taken by the previous administrations. Do they kind of deliberately look hostile to persons trying to attempt to come to the U.S.? And what decisions and acts by the previous administration demonstrate that image of hostility?
I think there was a great deal of videos and pictures, on social media, where you had children in what they call cages, right? You had children, a number of children in the same holding cell. You had the inhumane practices that people often complained about once they've reached our shores. And I think that that is something that we need to be cognizant of. To think that the Biden administration is going to come in and completely change the process overnight.
How do you think his policies towards this border entry might differ from the previous administration?
Well, first and foremost, the Biden administration rolled back the Trump administration's policy on not essentially allowing folks to apply for asylum. That's what he did. But he also made it very clear to those migrants, don't come to our shores. He is nonetheless allowing the children, at the very minimum, to be put in a center until they're able to figure out what is next.
Do you also get a sense that in some cases parents are trying to keep their children away from drugs, gangs, and crime, and to give them a better economic chance here in the U.S.?
Absolutely. And we also have to look at how U.S. foreign policies have led to the crippling of some of these economies in these countries across the region that is forcing people to come here to begin with. And I think that, if the U.S. government really wants to help, I think the most important thing is to assist those governments with direct foreign investments. So if there are jobs available, I think you will see less migration.
But Joanna, some people may say it is their country's leaders that are supposed to take care of the economy and the needs of the people and not the United States. Why should the United States be involved in the structure and the economic prosperity of another country?
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. It is the job of elected officials in those countries to ensure that there are systems in place so that people can pursue life, liberty, and happiness, right? But at the same token, the United States as a global leader has a duty to strengthen bilateral relations with other nations across the region, and also to promote trade cooperation with those countries as well.
And now you have these people coming into the country, and because of their situation, they don't come with any protective gear. There is no social distancing, there is no mask. What does that speak to the health of the United States, and even for those people and the Border Patrol officers who have to receive these children and these families?
It is incredibly difficult to engage in social distancing when you're trying to cross a border with so many other people, and even when you are in contact with the Border Patrol agents. But also during the pandemic, we saw how the Biden administration has deported countless people to different countries across the region, just like the Trump administration did. And oftentimes those people are exporting the virus to those countries. It is very challenging. It is very challenging, but I think all parties involved are doing their best to address the situation in the best possible way.
Join us tomorrow for part 2 of my interview with Joanna LeBlanc when she talks about the need to put a human face to those in dire need of survival. Let us know what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also, check out our headlines 24/7 on WEWEAfrica.com. Still to come, tensions rise again in the U.S. state of Minnesota ahead of the outcome in the former police officer Derek Chauvin's murder trial. We'll be right back.
Welcome to Straight Talk Africa, live from the Voice of America headquarters here in Washington. I am Shaka Sali. Straight Talk Africa, we call it like it is. We discuss issues that reflect the interests of our audience without fear or favor. We are guided by facts, and I look at myself as a servant of nothing but the truth.
Welcome back to Africa 54. The killing of a black motorist during a police traffic stop earlier this week has raised tensions in the U.S. state of Minnesota, which is preparing for an outcome in a former police officer Derek Chauvin's murder trial. VOA's Jesus Meoni has more.
Tensions are boiling over in the U.S. state of Minnesota surrounding the police-involved deaths of 2 black men, with daily protests and clashes taking place since Sunday when 20-year-old Dante Wright was fatally shot during a traffic stop.
Put her in jail, like they would do any one of us.
Police officer Kim Potter was arrested and is facing second-degree manslaughter charges for what officials say was an accidental discharge of her gun that killed Wright. She has been released on bail.
If she didn't know in 26 years the difference in size and weight of a gun as opposed to a taser, then how was she a veteran in policing? How was she even on the force that long?
Just a few kilometers away, former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin is on trial for criminal charges stemming from the death last May of George Floyd. A pathologist testifying for Chauvin's legal team Wednesday said there was no evidence that Chauvin's knee impacted any of the vital structures of Floyd's neck and that multiple factors led to his death.
The toxicology, the fentanyl and methamphetamine, there is exposure to a vehicle exhaust, so potentially carbon monoxide poisoning, or at least an effect from increased carbon monoxide in his bloodstream, and paraganglionoma, or the other natural disease process that he has. So all of those combined to cause Mr. Floyd's death.
He contradicted several medical experts for the prosecution who testified that Floyd died primarily due to a lack of oxygen from the way he was pinned to the pavement for more than 9 minutes. Prosecutors questioned Fowler's findings.
If you apply pressure to someone's neck and squeeze until the person becomes unresponsive, and you maintain that pressure for at least 4 minutes, you will cause irreversible brain damage because you will have starved the brain of oxygen. Is that true?
Correct. It takes 4 minutes of no supply of oxygen to the brain to cause irreversible brain damage.
The White House Wednesday called for Congress to pass police reform legislation.
Too often in this country, law enforcement uses unnecessary force, and too often that results in the death of Black Americans.
The deaths of Floyd and Wright have led to protests and calls for racial justice in the United States. Jason Samelny, VOA News, Washington.
On Tuesday, President Joe Biden announced his plan to withdraw all 2,500 American troops from Afghanistan by September 11th, months later than the May 1st deadline that the Trump administration and the Taliban agreed on last year. White House correspondent Patsy Widakuswara has this report.
After 20 years, close to $1 trillion, more than 2,300 American deaths, and the loss of tens of thousands of Afghan lives, the U.S. is saying enough.
We went to war with clear goals. We achieved those objectives. Bin Laden is dead, and Al-Qaeda is degraded in Iraq, in Afghanistan. And it's time to end the forever war.
President Joe Biden announced that all 2,500 American troops will withdraw from Afghanistan by September 11th, 2 decades after the U.S. invaded the country following attacks by the terrorist group Al-Qaeda, who sought haven there. The Trump administration had previously set May 1st as the withdrawal deadline, providing that the Taliban, the Muslim fundamentalist group controlling Afghanistan, cut ties with Al-Qaeda. Biden set his withdrawal without conditions, arguing there is no point to continue to fight an intractable war and expect different results. Some Republicans say the Taliban will regain control and hurt Afghan and U.S. interests.
President Biden, unfortunately, has chosen the highest risk option available, which is to leave no matter what.
In coordination with the U.S., NATO on Wednesday announced withdrawal of 10,000 of its forces from Afghanistan by May 1st.
Any Taliban attacks on our troops during this period will be met with a forceful response.
Biden said the U.S. and its allies will continue training and equipping almost 300,000 Afghan troops, support humanitarian efforts, and engage diplomatically.
We will support peace talks between the government of Afghanistan and the Taliban facilitated by the United Nations, and will continue to support the rights of Afghan women and girls.
In response to Biden's decision to pull troops in September instead of May, the Taliban issued a warning, increasing fears of violence and the collapse of the Afghan government.
There's probably no option that significantly reduces the level of violence. There's also probably no option on the table to build the Afghanistan that the United States probably had in mind when they invested more than $1 trillion in the war. And so, yes, this is probably the best of a series of bad options.
The Afghan Peace Council, a body created to negotiate with the Taliban, is set to meet in Turkey later this month, but peace prospects are dim. Following his remarks, Biden visited Arlington National Cemetery to pay respects to soldiers who lost their lives in the war. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News.
President Joe Biden has offered to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin for a summit in a third country, while at the same time warning Moscow amid a massive buildup of Russian troops that any aggression against Ukraine will have consequences. VOA senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain reports.
Britain's Sky News filmed Russian troops deploying in the Voronezh area of Russia, close to the border with Ukraine. The largest troop buildup since Russia's 2014 illegal annexation of the Crimean Peninsula of Ukraine has alarmed leaders in Kyiv and the West, including U.S. President Joe Biden.
The president voiced our concerns over the sudden Russian military buildup and increasing aggression on the border of Ukraine and called on Russia to de-escalate tensions.
After meeting with NATO allies in Brussels, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said the U.S. will continue to provide Ukraine with material support to defend its territorial integrity and called on Russia to cease its provocations.
The national security architecture, our team, will always present our president with a range of options that are focused on employing, all of the elements of national power that we have available to us when we consider options to present to the president.
Russian-backed separatists and Ukrainian forces have been fighting in eastern Ukraine since 2014. More than 14,000 people have died in the conflict. Russia says it sent troops to its western borders for training exercises in response to threatening NATO actions. Amid the escalation, Biden offered to hold a summit in the coming months with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Russia expert Michael Kimmage of Catholic University told VOA he thinks that is a wise move.
So signal American commitment, resolve that there's not going to be concessions made or that the U.S. is approaching this from a position of weakness, but at the same time be willing to talk and to negotiate to the extent that these two countries can.
Several U.S. lawmakers have expressed alarm that Russia might be preparing to invade Ukraine.
I think we also ought to look at other things we can do to make it clear to Putin that we are concerned about their actions. That's why I've been a supporter of sanctions on Nord Stream 2, the pipeline, which would have a dramatic impact on Ukraine. I think we need to try and shut that down in every way possible.
Critics of Nord Stream 2 say the almost finished natural gas pipeline from Russia to Germany is a geopolitical project by Russia that threatens Europe's and Ukraine's energy security. Germany views the pipeline as a commercial venture. Cindy Sain, VOA News.
That's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.
Ili kuwa mwanafamilia bora wa Global TV, usisahau kusubscribe, like, kushare na kucomment. Baada ya kusubscribe, bonyeza alama ya kengele ili kupata taarifa kwa kila video inayopanda Global TV Online.